Okay, welcome back to another tutorial looking into how we can extend our interaction capabilities in our Unity VR application. In the last tutorial, we worked on introducing the hand models and the grab interactables and sort of the differences between the different type of interactions that you can have on the objects. We're going to go a little bit farther with this tutorial and look at how we can incorporate additional interactions such as two-handed grabbing, which is really good for when you have assets in your game that typically require two hands, like maybe some type of a weapon or a tool like some lawn or gardening tools, or just pretty much any object that you think might require two hands. So we'll cover that. And then we're also going to cover the ray interactor and poke interactions, and we'll extend kind of our controller and hand models to incorporate those behaviors as well. So let's go ahead and dive right in, and we'll get started with the two-hand grab. So this is actually fairly simple and is pretty similar to what we did for the single hand grab. And the first thing we need to start off with is we need to find an object that we want to add two-handed grab to. So as you can see here in my scene, I've added an additional cube component representing sort of a box, and that box is going to fall down onto this conveyor belt that I've recently added to my assets. And the idea here is that the conveyor is moving and the box will fall off, and I want to be able to pick the box up and put it back on the conveyor belt. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come over and we're going to select our cube here, and we can see that I've already got a box collider on it and a rigid body added to it. So whatever object you intend to apply the two-handed or even the single-handed grab to, more than likely you're going to want to add the box collider and the rigid body collider so that that will behave appropriately. If you recall, we did the same thing for our interactables that we were exploring in terms of the single-handed grab, right? So if you haven't done that already to the object you want to add grabbing to, go ahead and add a box collider or whatever appropriate collider for the shape of the object, and then a rigid body. And then inside your rigid body, just make sure that you've got some similar settings configured for that. And same thing for things like your box collider. I also added a physical material to that. So if you recall from some of our earlier tutorials on how to do that might be useful for you as well. All right, so we've got that set up, and now the next thing we want to do is we want to go back in and add our XR grab interactable. All right, and the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and find the use dynamic attach setting, because at least for this example, I want my hands to be able to reach out, and wherever I grab on the object, I want the attach point to just be where the hand currently is. We'll do an example where we use the attach transform after we do this, but let's start with dynamic attach. All right, so check that. All these should be checked as well. Um, And now the next thing that we need to do is we need to come into our select mode setting. Right now it's set to single, and what we want to do is set it to multiple. And when we set that to multiple, what it's telling the system is, hey, I want to be able to reach out with both hands and to grab the object, right? So if everything's working properly, we should automatically be able to go ahead and grab this box and reach out and use both hands to interact with it. So let's go ahead and test that out and see what happens. right, so you can see from that little quick test that we already have the two-handed grab working. You could see that as I reached out with one controller and grabbed the box, that it attached where my controller was, and when I reached out with my second hand and grabbed it, it attached at the second hand location, and then I could kind of twist and rotate and move my hands independently, and the box would rotate appropriately. You could also see that I was able to uh, hold on with one hand and release with the other, and the box stayed in the appropriate hand, and I could kind of switch those back and forth. So pretty natural interaction, and is like kind of intuitive way that you might pick up and manipulate an object, right? Now, let's go ahead and just for the sake of trying to understand some of the different options we have, let's also go ahead and let's take our object that we're grabbing, and let's just rename this. And I'm going to call this, cube dynamic or two-hand dynamic attach. And then I'm going to duplicate this object. And let's go ahead and I'm just going to drag it over here because I don't want it on the conveyor belt to begin with. It's going to fall down to the ground when the game starts, so I'll just leave it kind of where it is in the air. And then the only other thing I want to do just really quickly is to come into my assets and my materials, and let's just give this box a slightly different color. And let's call this, instead of two-hand dynamic attach, let's call this two-hand attach transform. And I just realized that I forgot hand on here, so let's go ahead and add that in. Cool. All right, so now the only thing we're going to do different here is we're going to take away the dynamic attach, and then you'll recall from our single hand grab that we had this attach transform here, right? And if you remember, the way that we managed that last time is we came onto the object where we needed an attach point, and we added an empty game object to that. So I'm going to call this first attach point, and then I'm going to create a second attach point. And then let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and drag the second attach point kind of out here to the left. And let's grab the first one, drag it over out here kind of to the right. And yeah, and we'll just kind of leave it at that for right now. And so what this will do is when we go to actually grab the box, regardless of where we grab it, it's going to snap our hand to those attach points, right? So let's go ahead and give that a test and see how that does. All right, so we see my two boxes over here. Let's go back and we'll grab the first one like we did last time. And again, I'll show you that I can grab it, I can rotate it, I can move it in all the different ways. So put that over there. And now when I grab this one, you can see how it's snapped to that attach point. And when I grab the second one, I get the same kind of effect. It's grabbing over on this. Now it's switched to the first one when I let go. So that's maybe the only downside to the second grab attach point. You can see I'm getting a little bit of a, kind of a weird condition here. So let's go back in and just kind of double check it and make sure that there's nothing weird going on. So let's go ahead and put that down, and we'll go ahead and leave. Let's just go back and just double check our attach point and make sure that we have that set up the way we want. Okay, so you can see really quickly, I actually swapped out the empty game objects for two sphere objects, mainly just so that we could see the interaction a little bit better and kind of confirm that it was working the way that we intended. So let's go ahead and hit play again and just take a look at how the interaction works with those new attach points. All right, so I will go ahead and teleport over there. And like I showed you before, I can pick up this other box and kind of get that out of my way. And now when I grab the first box, I attach to the first anchor point, and then I grab the second, and you can see it attaches to the second anchor point. I can kind of rotate these, and you can see that this one rotates kind of around the first grab point. Cool. And I can just toss that over there, and now it'll come back to me here. Cool. And when I grab it, locks into those 2 points. So you can see it's working kind of like we would expect. So that's great. All right, so let's get out of here and let's continue looking at some additional settings that we can manipulate here. All right, so we've got that working, and I'm going to leave those on there for now. Again, you can choose to use an empty game object, or you can go ahead and add, some kind of a visual anchor point just to confirm that your stuff is working. But the next thing we want to do is looking at this set of settings called the grab transformer configuration. So right now what it's doing is it's adding a default in terms of how the hands and the grabbing behave when we are interacting via two hands. So what we're going to do though is we want to customize this. So we're going to type XR grab general grab transformer. Yep, that's the one we want. All right, so we want this XR general grab transformer. And then what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck this, the default grab transformer. We're going to go ahead and add a new one. And then we're going to drag the XR general grab transformer on there. And what this is telling the system is, hey, I want you to use these settings, not the default, to determine how our grab is going to behave. You can see there's a couple of different things in here, right? So we can actually constrain the displacement of axes, right? So that would be like how much translation relative to the object's rotation. So we can turn off uh, different axes. So if we didn't want it to rotate around a particular one, we can basically shut that off. The other thing we can do is determine how the access is computed, right? Whether it's relative to, the world space, relative to the object, relative to, a particular world axis. So that's some stuff you can kind of play around with. And then the rotation constraints, basically we can, you know, set it up to where it's sort of averaging the rotation between the two hands using just the rotation of the first hand relative to the second hand, or just the first hand only. So again, I don't know that there is a right answer for which of these. For the most part, you can kind of leave those set to default. But what's also interesting is you can see that there's a setting here for adjusting scaling, right? So what this is kind of useful for is situations where you want to be able to use the hands to actually scale the value of the object. Um, so let's go ahead and play around with this just to kind of see what happens. So I'm going to set it to, let's see. Yeah, so let's go ahead and set it to the two-handed scaling, and then let's go in and play around with the box and see what we get. All right, and so what I'm expecting to happen is something similar to last time where I'm able to pick up the box, right? Snaps to my first hand, snaps to my second hand, and then as you can see, as I pull my hands apart, this box is getting bigger and bigger. And as I push them closer together, I can shrink the box down, right? So you can see that kind of happening, right? So, kind of a cool feature, especially if you're adding like an object dynamically to your scene. So let's say, like some of the design-oriented projects that some people have, being able to, grab an object like a plant or another building component and scale it to a size that you want. And you can see, the cubes on this were, kind of relatively the same size. So I can scale them back up, getting a little closer. So again, kind of a useful feature. And just remember, you can kind of adjust the settings on these things as you go. And there you kind of have it. There's two-handed grabbing. All right, so we've got that set up, and I'm going to go ahead and just for movement type, I'm going to set this to velocity tracking on this object because I don't want it to pass through any of my other objects in the scene. I'm going to leave the spheres on it again just for my own visualization, just so I know kind of where to expect the attach points. Again, if you don't like that, you can always switch it back to dynamic attach. Um, and then, play around with these different settings. If you take away a certain access, it may, prevent you from accidentally rotating an object upside down, right? So maybe you want to turn off the rotation in the X and the Y, or the X and the Z or something like that, so that it's only rotating around the Y axis, right? So, spinning it as opposed to flipping it. So, play around with these settings depending on the type of situation that you have. And again, remember, this is like translation constraints, and then some of these are like the rotation constraints. So just play around with different combinations of that until you figure it out, and you should be good to go. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next topics in our tutorial here, and that's incorporating the ray interactor and the poke interaction. So if you recall, we've messed around with teleport interactors, we've messed around with direct interactors, which is what let us grab things. We did some configuration on the right-hand controller to sort of manage some of the behaviors around that. And so now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and incorporate the ray interactor, right, which is similar to our teleport interactor in that it shoots out like a visualized line, right, of where our controller or our hand is pointing, and then allows us to interact with objects at a distance. So let's go ahead and come into our assets where we have our XR interaction toolkit, and let's go ahead and pull up the interactors. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a ray interactor to our left controller, and we're going to grab this ray interactor and add it to our right controller. And then let's go ahead and click on Control on your keyboard, and let's select both of these. And what we're going to do is we're going to expand the settings here so we can see a couple things. Let's go ahead and expand all those settings out. And yours may look a little different from mine by default. I think I've manipulated these a couple times when I've been kind of playing around. So for some reason yours is a little different. Take a quick look at my settings and see if you can kind of match those up. What we're going to do is we want to first change the visualization of our raycast. So if you recall, with like our teleport interactor array, we could come in and we could manipulate, some of these different colors and things associated with the raycast. So what we're going to do is we are going to come over to, let's see, it's the line renderer that we want. I think we're going to skip the line renderer. I don't think we need to mess with that. And let's go ahead and we're going to adjust the valid color. And again, yours may be set to something different, but go ahead and come in here and click on the controls for the color right here. And let's go ahead and set ours to, this kind of magenta color. I think that'll be, kind of a fun color. And so what this is showing is that the line that's coming out is going to kind of, whenever you're pointing at an object that you can grab using the ray interactor or that you can, interact with, it'll turn this magenta color with a little bit of a gradient as it comes closer to your hand or the controller. And then on the invalid color, what we're going to do is we're actually going to basically make it invisible. We don't want the ray interactor showing up unless there's something that we can actually interact with. So go ahead and what you'll do is you'll click on this little chevron looking item up here, and we're going to actually set the alpha value, which is the transparency value, all the way down to 0. So what that's telling our system is, unless the ray interactor is pointing at something that is interactable, go ahead and just make it invisible. As soon as it comes into contact with something that can be interacted, make it this magenta. And then under certain conditions, if something's like blocking your ray interactor from being able to meet the target, it'll show yellow. All right, so that's good. And is there any other settings in here that we want to mess with? Yes, so let's go ahead and this line length, pick a distance, and again, this is a distance in these this sort of standard Unity units, right? So think in terms of like 1 meter. Right now, this is saying the ray cast will go out like 10 meters in your game, which is super far. I think the building that I created in my game is only like maybe 2 or 3 meters long. So pick a number, probably somewhere in like the 3 to 10, 4 to 10 meter range. I'm going to pick 4 for the line length, and that will keep the ray cast from going like way, 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 way too far away from me, and ensure that the interaction is kind of reasonable. Now the next thing that we want to do is on the left controller. Let's actually let's scroll back up and double check one more thing on this. All right. And let's look at the actual ray interactor settings itself. So what I'm going to do is on the left hand, I'm going to toggle on this force grab. And what this force grab does is sort of like, being a Jedi, right? I want to reach out towards some object that's far away from me. And when I hit the grab button, I want that object to snap to my left hand. And the reason we're turning it on for the left hand and not the right hand is we want to just have that, show that difference in behavior, right? So when I use the raycast with my left hand and I pull the grab button, it's going to grab the object and bring it to my hand. Whereas on the right hand, it is going to grab the object at the intersection of where that ray and that object meet. So it'll keep the object at the same distance. And then there's some interesting sort of interactions and controls that we'll get from the from that particular type of interaction. So I think we can leave all this other default settings in here alone. Now, the only other thing that we need to do is on this right-hand controller, you'll recall that we set up this sort of interaction group and action-based control manager. And what that does is to try and limit some of the behaviors of the system when you're using particular interactions. So like for example, if I'm grabbing an object, I don't necessarily want my teleport to be able to be triggered, right? I want to be able to use the interactor without interference from these things. And so what we're going to do is we're going to come up to our starting group members, and we've already added the teleport interactor. We've already added our direct interactor. I think you can kind of move these around, I believe, and switch them. I don't know if that has a huge impact on things, but you can kind of see also that you can also set which things override other things. So for example, maybe you do want teleport to override, one of the other behaviors. Okay, well, you can make that decision by toggling it on relative to the other option here. So let's go ahead and add the Ray interactor in. Now you can see that this has given me the option where I can say, the teleport interactor, it can override a grab. So if I go to teleport, it'll make me drop something that I have grabbed. Or if I'm, trying to teleport, but I grab something, I can have teleport turn off. You also see there's a space down here for the Ray interactor. Again, kind of manipulating the controls. All of this should still be pretty standard. And so just doing that makes sure that our interaction is going to be is going to work pretty seamlessly. So right there, we should have the Ray interaction set up and ready to go. There's really not anything else you need to do as long as you have grabbable objects in your scene, which we do from our previous tutorials. We have the 3 cubes over here, and then I've made this box and this box also interactable. So we can go ahead and just dive into to the play here and just see what happens. All right, so I've got my controllers here, and you can see that when I point my raycast at the objects, my little purple line appears. When I have nothing, you don't see anything on my hands, and so I can point at that cube with my right hand, and you can see when I grab it, it stays attached to the end of the ray. And what's cool with this is that if I take my thumbstick and I push forward or backwards on it, I can actually bring that cube forward and backwards. I can rotate it left and right. I can rotate it kind of on an angle so I can get some, kind of subtle rotation in pretty much every direction, which is kind of cool. And you could imagine, right, that, when you are, say manipulating the environment, right, you have some objects that you want to place around the environment and you don't want to have to walk around all the time. It might be kind of convenient to be able to just, grab something, extend it out a ways and place it, right? So for example, I can, place this cube on my conveyor belt and it'll go marching on down. Same thing with this box. I can grab it and I can put it on the conveyor belt and it'll do its thing. Now, if I want to use my left hand actually will snap the object, and you can see because of the attach points I've set up uh, that the interaction still works. And what's really cool is because we set up the two-hand interaction, it also works for the raycast. So you can see my raycast actually snapped to that second anchor point, and is now helping me let me rotate the box around, which is kind of a cool feature. Um, so again, I can swap that to the right hand. I can do some rotation. I can scroll that out, and then I can put it again back onto my conveyor belt here, and let it kind of go on its merry way. So yeah, that's the raycast, and you can see again when I'm pointing at stuff that can't interact, it doesn't do anything. It can still teleport. I can still move and turn and do all that great stuff. But now I have the ability to interact with these things from a distance, right? Which is kind of cool. You can kind of see it a little bit too, like in some cases the raycast will, kind of bend or flex, which is kind of a neat feature too. So for some reason this cube is like, I don't know, kind of locked into the surface of some of the things. I'm not sure what's going on there, but kind of an interesting little effect. So all right, so that's the raycast, and again, if that's something that you think you would find beneficial in your scene, definitely keep that turned on.
If it isn't something that you think would be beneficial, go ahead and implement it. And as always, if you need to turn something off, you can simply just come up and click on that Ray interactor and hit the little checkbox in the inspector and turn that feature off. All right, so now that we've got two-handed grab and we've got the Ray interaction going, now I want to actually move on to the poke interactor. And the poke interactor is kind of an interesting one. We can kind of see a little bit of that behavior with the things that we built. But what the poke interactor is intended to be used with is typically things like UI elements. So you can imagine as a UI panel pops up, you might want to be able to reach out and click a button or drag a slider or anything that kind of has a touch interaction. And then the other thing that it's useful for is the sort of interactable like button and lever objects and things that we saw in that demo that I showed in class. So let's go ahead and just for fun, let's go back to our demo scene. And I think we had, yep, there was an interactable button, right? That is in our sample here under prefabs interactables. And I'm going to go ahead and add this button into my scene, and I'm going to put it kind of over here on top of the conveyor belt, right? And what I want to do with this button is just kind of put it, kind of on the top here, almost like it's an e-stop for the conveyor belt. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, this has already got what is called an XR poke filter and an XR poke follow affordance and, simple interactable kind of setup on it, right? Since it's a prefab. Our grab interactables, don't have that. I think if we go in and type add component and then XR poke, you can add the poke interactor, onto different objects to allow them to be, kind of interacted with. And again, this is like if you're going to like kind of create your own custom behavior for the interaction. Um, but let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and modify our controllers and our hand models so that they can correctly engage and interact with the button, right? So I just want to show you real quick that when I go to like use this button, if I don't add a poke interactor to the actual controller model or the hand model, nothing's gonna happen. It'll respond with like some visual feedback, but it won't actually let me push that button, right? So let me just show you that real quick. All right, so I'm gonna teleport over here, get kind of close, and when I go to like push the button down, nothing's happening, right? It's just lighting up, letting me know, hey, this thing's interactable. Same thing over here. I can do these things and I can grab this stuff, but I can't grab this either. I can't like grab it and push it. So what we want to do is we want to go ahead and change that so that the behavior works properly. All right. So what do we need to do that? All right. So if you recall, on our left controller and our right controller, we have this XR controller, and we have the left-hand model and the right-hand model currently being used in our scene. So I want to come over to our prefabs over here, and we're going to actually modify the prefab. So what you want to do is you want to come down, find where your hand prefab is, and you're going to double click on, let's just start with the right hand. And on the right hand, what we're going to add onto this model is we're going to add the poke interactor. All right. And so now when this thing is attached um, to our model, it's telling the system like, hey, this thing can engage with pokeable objects, right? Um, And now we also just need to kind of define like where on the hand model do we want that poke interaction to take place. So I believe if you don't put anything in here, it's just going to try and find the center of the model. What we actually want to find is like, say, the fingertip, right? So let's kind of take a look here. Looks like this is the index finger. So there's like the first knuckle, there's the second knuckle, there's the third, and right here is the tip of the right hand's finger, right? So your pointer finger. So I think that's what we want to use for our attached transform. So let's come back over here because this is where we're going to drag it, and we're just going to grab this and we're going to drag that in. And so again, this is telling the system, hey, the tip of this right hand finger is going to be where the poke interaction takes place. All right, so let's go ahead and do the same thing on the left hand, add the poke interactor, leave that kind of set up as it is. Go ahead and just, expand out the geometry of the hand here. I'm not sure why it's not giving me all of the options. Interesting. All right. Let's come back in and take a look at that real quick. Oh, here we go. All right, so yeah, here's our index finger. It's on hand world. Again, you might have to expand the hand again. Index finger, keep expanding it. And as you get there, you'll see that the fingertip is this index finger point right here. All right, so come back to our left hand model, grab this item right here, drag that over to our attached transform. And now our prefabs, the things that the system reads from, is going to now have the poke interaction added to it. So if we go back into our scene, hit play, I'll show you guys how that works. All right. All right, so we can come back over here, and now you can see when I push my hand, I get an interaction with that. Now the other thing is I added a poke interactor to this block, so I'm curious what'll happen. All right, yeah, you can kind of see like a little bit of an interaction taking place with this object. So you don't even necessarily need to attach a poke interactor to your hand. You could actually attach the poke interactor. You can see if I do that, it kind of moves the object. So you can actually add the poke interactor to other objects in the scene as well. So that's kind of cool. All right. So that's got the poke interaction working for the hand models, but not everyone is using the hand models. Some of us may actually still be using the Oculus controllers. So what do we want to do to the Oculus controllers to make those behave in a similar fashion? So what we're going to do is something kind of similar here. We're going to come over to our controller prefab that we brought in and manipulated, find where that is, double click it, and now we're going to have the controller model up. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come back down to the different interactors that we have, right? And instead of adding in the poke interactor via the component, we can actually now grab this prefab interactor from the sample, and we can drag it up onto our Quest controller. And you can see that it adds this object into the scene, right? It adds this little like wand to the controller. Not in a particularly great location, but it is there, and the poke interaction point is set up already on the object as the little sphere at the end of the wand. And now what we want to do is we just want to reposition this wand to a place that seems to work a little bit better on the control. And I already kind of mapped that out for the right hand controller. So if you set it to -0.005, on the X, and then 0.08 on the Z, what you get is, something that kind of sticks out from the control a little bit, is somewhat centered on the controller, and will, serve as like kind of a good guide for where that interaction is going to take place. All right, so we've added this poke interactor to our right controller. Let's go back into our controller prefabs, and let's do the same thing on our left controller. And again, I'm coming back over to this interactors prefab. I'm going to drag it up here onto the controller, and then I'm assuming that 5, yeah, so instead of negative, you're going to do a positive 0.005 and then 0.08. So again, that should put us kind of in a reasonably closely centered kind of perspective for this. And yeah, that's all there is to it. Again, it's already set up to do the interaction. So now we can come back. And again, if we want to use the controllers instead of the hand models, we can just come in here and go back to our prefabs for our controllers. And I'm going to drag the left-hand controller into here. And I'll click on my right-hand one, and I'll drag the right-hand one in there. And now when I hit play, what I should see is the controllers instead of the hand models. All right, let's go ahead and grab these. Yep, and there you go. There are my controllers. You can see the little poke interactor wands on the end of it. And if I come over to the button here, you can see that as I kind of interact, nothing's happening in the controller, but as soon as I put that wand on the button, I can now push it, right? So again, depending on your setup and kind of how your environment is configured, maybe this is the option you want to go with in terms of placing the little poke interaction there on the controller. The other thing to keep in mind too is as you get a little more comfortable with the scripting, if there's some things you want to do in terms of changing the look and feel of this, like you can always do things like, oh, turn off the visual for these poke interactors, like disable them if you're not in an environment or space where there's something interactable. Or once, maybe I could put up a collider around this area so that when I enter it, the visualization of the poke interactor enables so that they're not always on the end of the controller, that kind of thing. So, be creative, figure out what works for you and your environment. But yeah, that's how you can kind of set that up. So now that we have the button in the scene, let's just, quickly do a little exploration to see if we can, maybe create some kind of a script for controlling the interaction of, say, like, something in the scene using this button. So I'm going to pause the video here for a second, and I will put together a quick script, and then I will walk you through what I have the script doing and kind of how I developed that. Okay, so I have now set up a script, a couple of scripts actually, um, that are now associated with the push button that we just added. And this part will be a little bit confusing, I would imagine, just because it's very unique to my particular application. So bear with me and try to follow along as best you can. But hopefully you'll be able to kind of glean from this the method by which you could apply something like this button and its current state to basically manipulating something in your environment. So in this case, what I want to be able to do is I want to be able to turn on and off my conveyor. So let's look at my conveyor real quick because there's some things structurally about it that I want to just kind of point out to you. So the conveyor that I built is probably not the best way to build something like this, but again, I was doing this to just try and get something quick and dirty that would make sense for this factory. And you can see here that I have what I would call a roller that is essentially just an empty game object with a box collider. Um, and then it has a script on it called roll. And Essentially, what this is doing is it is actually the collision that is controlling the movement of the boxes as they kind of convey down the conveyor, right? So it's basically a script that's going to tell the boxes how to move relative to the conveyor as they are placed on it. And then the child object that I have here is the actual cylinder itself, right? With the mesh and the color and everything. And you can see, like, if I click on, for example, one of these, that, this has like a little texture that I applied to it. These are just sort of gray, but they have something on it, a script on them that's called roller turn. Because essentially, I wanted um, the roller to have a visual of spinning to be independent from the collision that was actually propelling the box along the surface. If I had combined those two things, my collider would have been spinning along with the visual. And so I had to do it this way just for expedience. I'm sure there's probably a better way to do this. But as a result, I actually have two scripts, one that controls the visual and one that controls the motion. And so that has complicated sort of the nature of how this push button is going to work. But to kind of keep it simple at first, let's just look at the push button itself. And what I want you to do on your push button is to hit add component, and you could do something a little simpler. And in fact, we can kind of mess with this one directly in here and added something that says, like, push button, object on. I think that'd probably be a reasonable one. What we can do here is we'll modify this script to maybe like turn on or off one of these game objects. So go ahead and just add a script, call it push button underscore on. And then once you've created that, double click in and you should get something that looks a bit like this. Now, yours won't be filled out yet. You'll be missing some different things in here that I have, but I'll go over really quickly the different components that you need to add to get this script up and running and doing something. All right, so at its base, the first thing we need to do is we need to come in and add in this using Unity Engine.xr.interaction toolkit because that is basically the library, the resource from a scripting perspective that will allow us to access the XR simple interactable that is attached to our push button and to listen for whether or not that button has been pushed on or off. All right, so you definitely need to add this so that we can access all of the variables and components associated with the XR interaction toolkit. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're gonna add what is called a private boolean, a private bool. So a bool is just a type of variable that represents something that is true or false. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this to true to begin with, because my game, when it starts, the conveyor is on. And if we're going to use this same script for any game object that you have in your environment, let's just assume your game object is already enabled and is visible, um, at the moment. So let's go ahead and set a private bool, and you can just say, object on instead of conveyor on, and set that equal to true. And then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to come down to where it says void start. So everybody's application should start off, like when you start a script, should start off with void start, and I think it's like void update. You don't need the update. You can go ahead and highlight that and delete it if you'd like, or you could just leave it alone. It won't bother your script any if you leave it. But we're going to come into the void start, and what we're going to do is we're going to add this this line of code here that says get component XR simple interactable, and then select entered dot add listener parentheses x equals greater than toggle object on. So you're gonna change yours to say object on here. Um, In fact, I'll go ahead and do the same. I'll just call it object on. And again, you may want to, for your, if you have a specific object that you're using, go ahead and use the name of that object, because it'll just, help it keep it straight in your mind. All right. And as you can see, I'm having to update a bunch of stuff because I changed that name, but that's all right. We'll talk through this really quickly after I get done changing it. Cool. All right. So we've added in that Boolean object on. We're now telling the system at the very start, when you hit play, when you turn on the application, find the XR simple interactable associated with the game object that this script is attached to. So anytime you attach a script to an object, it automatically knows what game object, which in this case is our push button, the script is attached to. And so when you call certain functions like get component, notionally what it's actually doing is calling something called game object dot get component. But this game object piece is sort of inferred because the script is attached to a game object. So right now, what it's really saying is push button, get your XR simple interactable component, right? Because on our component, we have this XR simple interactable, and it's just like a bunch of all of our other components, right? It has different states or events that kind of take place, right? Hover, exited, selected, right? And so that's what the push button is doing. It's got this XR interactable, and it's essentially toggling on and off selected. Um, and so what we're asking it to do is say, hey, for that simple interactable on our push button, listen for the state of the select entered. So in the case of the push button, that is if the push button goes all the way down, select entered fires or is triggered. And what we're saying is when you hear that interaction take place, go ahead and perform this function. And this function toggle object on has some behaviors or things that it's going to do, right? I forget what the X and this equal sign actually means. It's pretty much just telling the system like, hey, this is an event that needs to be started. Don't worry about that. Just make sure that you have it in there. If you're super curious about it, just Google it. I'm sure there's a much better explanation out there on Stack Overflow than I can provide. But essentially, it's just what is needed to trigger the event argument for this toggle on function to fire. And so when this function fires, what we have it doing is taking the current Boolean, which is set to true, and telling it to set it to false, right? So anytime you see an exclamation in front of a variable, especially one that's like a Boolean, it's telling it to basically switch it to the opposite. So exclamation object on, when object on was set initially to true, means it's going to change. It's going to be the opposite. It's going to say false. So right now what we're doing is we're telling that Boolean to turn to the opposite. And the reason you do it this way is that way, like every time you push the button, well, the next time, so right now it's true. If I push the button, it sets the object on to false. If I push the button again, this time it's going to set it to true because now object on is false and the opposite of false is true. So this is a really clever way of making sure that you can toggle between true and false, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, without having to write any kind of fancy if-then kind of statement, right? So this is just a clever programming trick that you'll probably come across as you start to do more and more scripts. So what we're going to do here for right now is just put a debug.log and just ask the system to write out in the console, like, is the conveyor set to be on or off, essentially. Is it true or is it false? All right, so go ahead and hit save. If that's set up correctly, then you shouldn't get any errors. And then what you'll see on the play is that when you hit play, if we push this button, we should see the console readout that the true and false is switching. So let's go ahead and test that first before we do anything to like the any objects in the scene. All right, so I'm going to zip over there, and then I'm going to hit the button a couple times here. And then we can kind of come back and we can look that the system is showing that, it was turned false, and, it's repeating a bunch of times, partly because of the scripts that I have turned on currently, but it is switching between the true and false. All right, and the way we'll demonstrate that and double check that is we're going to go ahead and modify this script. And what I want you to do is I want you to come in here and we're going to add a public game object. And we're just going to call it asset. All right. And the difference between private and public is this is when you set something to private, it basically is saying like only the script can see that variable. When you set it to public, what it's doing is it's telling the user interface in Unity to show me that variable, right? So now you can see that I've got this asset variable living here. Right now there's no game object in it. What I'm going to do is grab, let's say, this instantaneous cube, and I'm going to drag that instantaneous cube into into the into the variable there. So what that's doing is it's taking this game object and associating it with this variable. So now when I come in here, what I can do is I can basically toggle that game object on and off, the same way I might toggle it on and off using the check mark up here, right? So when I hit this check mark, it disappears. When I hit it, it turns back on. All right, so now what we're going to do is we're going to come into our script, and where we have this toggle object on or off, now we can go ahead and we can add in something like asset, which is our game object, dot, let's see, asset dot get component, or get component, or get asset dot set, yeah, set active, and then we can pass it object on, right? And so if you read that little description here, it says that set active activates or deactivates the game object depending on if the value passed to it is true or false. So if I say asset set active, what it's saying is if cube instantaneous is the asset, turn it on or off based on object on. So if it's false, it's going to turn off. If it's true, it's going to turn it on. So this should turn on and off that cube for me. So I should be able to push the button, look over, and the orange cube is gone. Push the button, orange cube is back. So let's give that a test and see if that works. And that'll let us know that our button is toggling things on and off in kind of a simple, singular script sort of way. All right. So again, look at my push button. I got cube instantaneous. And I'm going to go ahead and hit play. You can see right now the orange cube is currently on, and I'm going to put it kind of right next to the button. That way it's super easy for us to see. And there you go. The cube disappears, cube reappears, cube disappears, cube reappears. So you can see like very easily that this button, is doing something useful for me. And you can even see on my conveyor belt, you probably can't hear it, but in my headset, I can hear that this conveyor belt is making a sound. The rollers are turning. If I were to take said cube and place it on the conveyor belt, it would move down the line. When I hit the button, the cube disappears, the conveyor belt stops. If I turn it back on, the cube reappears and continues down the conveyor belt. All right. So we know the script is working, right? So, at a minimum in your own game, maybe you can just stop there, pick a random object that you can toggle on and or off. Um, and that will, be a good example for you of how you can use these interactive prefabs to, create some interesting behaviors or mechanics in your game. I imagine you're going to have a lot of questions about this, so feel free to bring those up in class or on the Discord if you're having any problems. Um, just as a bonus, this is not something I need you to implement for any of the homework, but I'll show you what I did with my conveyor belt to get this to work, just so you have a sense of, maybe how to go about doing this in a way if you have a maybe a little bit more complicated scene like I do. All right, so for your homework, you'll need to go ahead and, drag in a button or something and just demonstrate that you can at least get it to go true and false and maybe turn on and off an object. But this next part will be just more informational. All right, so my conveyor, as I pointed out, is a little bit complex, right? So this has a script on it, um, the roller itself that moves the box, and then this script here for the visual um, has a script on it. And then I also have a separate game object associated for the audio source. And what I did is I created another script. I came in, I said add component, created the script, conveyor audio on, and then I wrote a script that basically will let me turn on and off the associated conveyor belt noise. And the way I did that is the same way that we just did for turning on and off the cube, essentially. I added in this Unity using statement for Unity Engine XR Interaction Toolkit. I added in a public variable for the XR Simple Interactable because right now my conveyor audio object doesn't even know that the push button exists. I need to somehow associate either my push button with a game object that some behavior is going to happen, or I need to associate some game object with my push button, right? So depending on where you put your script sort of dictates which one of these things you need to do. So back over here on our push button, because the script was on the push button, I had to add in a public game object that could then tell the push button, hey, do something to the cube instantaneous. In this particular instance, though, I need to tell the conveyor audio, hey, there's a push button out there with an XR simple interactable on it. You're going to interact with that thing, right? So that's why it's public XR simple interactable instead of game object. Now, the other thing I needed to do was I needed to create a public component that I could use to associate the audio source from my game object. Um, so again, you know, you're kind of limited in what is immediately available to you from a game object. So as I add components to the game object, I need to be able to have some way of referencing it. And so when I added these two public variables in, it allowed me to drag the push button control into this variable, right, and grab the XR simple interactable associated with it. And on the audio source, I can drag that in and it would associate the audio source there. All right. And then I basically followed the exact same procedure here for the audio that I did for turning on and off the cube. I said, hey, the audio is going to be on at the beginning of the game, so go ahead and set that to true. Listen for the XR interactive simple interactable. Listen for that select entered, and when you hear it fire, you're going to take and do this behavior. And in this case, it's listening for, well, if conveyor on is set to true, make the audio source play. If it's set to false, stop the audio source. All right. And I'm not going to go into the details of all of this, but depending on the behavior or action you want, you're going to probably use something kind of similar to this, right? You're going to say dot get component, and then it may be a mesh or an audio source or some other property associated with that game object that you're going to do some manipulation to, or it could be an animation that you're going to fire, right? As you start to get into some of the animations. All right, so this turns this part on and off. So that controls the audio. But that's only one of the 3 scripts that I needed to interact with, right? Um, so unfortunately, the way I built my conveyor belt is a little complicated, right? So now let's come over to the roll script. So this is the thing that moves the box down the conveyor belt. So again, I can use I can click on this roll script, and what you'll see that I did here is kind of again something very similar. I'll make it stand out a bit here. I added in this piece because I need to be able to call the XR interaction toolkit functions. I added in that simple interactable again. I set the conveyor belt to true at the beginning. At the start, I told it to listen for that button to be pushed. And then, all of the stuff that you see in here is, the mechanics that makes the box move. This toggle conveyor on is the same as the one I did for the audio, except instead of turning the audio source on and off, I have it changing the speed of my conveyor. So I basically, at the start of my application, the speed is set to 50, right? So I've got a variable in here called speed that determines how fast the box is moved down the conveyor belt. And I just set it to 0 if the conveyor gets turned to false, and back to 50 if it's turned to true. Um, Now, even that's not the best way to do it because, again, like you can see, I have an initial variable where I, keep the speed. So, notionally, I should have probably, instead of hard coding it to 50, I should probably store this initial value somewhere. That way, as I change this over time, that, it'll toggle back to the original speed rather than 50 all the time. So keep that in mind. Hard coding values can be kind of a nuisance. And what you may need to do is, um, have a uh, separate variable that stores the original speed. That way you can, on the first time you change it, you capture that speed before you change it. So that's something to keep in mind. Now let's look at one last thing, right? So that stops the box from moving when I toggle things on and off. And then I also need to get the rollers to stop moving, right? Because that's the other sort of visual indicator that something's going on, right, with the conveyor. So again, XR interaction toolkit, and then I pass these public and private variables. So I need that push button again, and then I set up the same kind of toggle, and it's exactly the same as the one I just showed you because the visualization is mapped to the same speed as the box movement, right? So again, I could have done this a little bit better, but this is just for demonstration purposes. All right, so when I do that, I'll very quickly show you kind of the effect of that. So we already saw that the push button can turn on and off our little orange cube. Now let's actually see it turn on and off the conveyor belt, just so that you can kind of see that you could do some pretty robust and interesting interactions. All right, so I'm going to teleport over here, and I'm going to grab my cube, and I'm going to bring it and set it kind of on the conveyor. And then I'm going to teleport over, and I'm going to hit the button, and it stops my conveyor belt, right? So again, I can kind of reach over, and let's go ahead and move the cube back over here just so we can kind of see it a little better. So it's moving, stops, moves, stops, moves, stops, moves, and there you go. So I've got a nice little e-stop added to my conveyor belt for safety, which is always great. And now hopefully you guys have a better sense of how you can leverage that interaction to drive some of the mechanics in your game. All right, so we covered two-handed grab, we covered the ray interaction and the poke interaction. Those will be the elements that you're going to be doing for your next homework assignment. Again, these interactions may not be the best for all of the different use cases that you guys are exploring. So if it isn't particularly relevant to the specific task that you're trying to simulate, that's fine. Just go ahead and add it in as a separate object somewhere, just to sort of demonstrate that you understand the concept and the principle of it. And then when you're actually running your game, you can go ahead and turn off any of these interactions that just don't make sense given your experience. But at least you'll have had a chance to try them out and to see how they work. We will also be using some of these techniques as we progress into the homework following this, when we start incorporating things like some UI elements that will be used to maybe toggle on and off some different settings. So definitely take the time to at least do the basic interaction of being able to push the button and say turn on and off an object, because that will be something you'll need to be able to use as we implement UI elements. All right, good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.